driving down into Ventura County is where we'll spend the rest of our time. All right, so now let's get to some data. This is updated from last year, but those of you that were here are familiar with this. Ventura County still finds itself in a prolonged period of economic weakness. And to characterize that, I want you to consider that Ventura County's population peaked in 2016 and has declined every single year since 2016. We're now down about 26,000 people from that peak. The civilian labor force peaked in 2012. That's to say, the number of people who live here and have a job peaked 13 years ago. We have actually had, we are up off of the bottom. We're not at the lowest civilian labor force, so we have had some modest gains in the last 2 years, but we're still well below, nearly 5% below that peak. And then real GDP is still down very substantially from 2007. Economic activity in the county peaked prior to the financial crisis and the Great Recession, and it hasn't recovered. We're down 9%. And so this is what that looks like in terms of population. You can see a modest decline every single year. The labor force story is interesting because when we compare our labor force growth to the United States, you actually see the US labor force was growing. There was a decline in COVID-19. And now, if you just imagine a dotted line that would have continued the trend, the US has already resumed its pre-COVID labor force growth. Here in Ventura County, we also have resumed the trend. There was a decline and we came back up. But we're now simply back on that continued trend. And so that means there's work to be done here, actually creating jobs that pay a living wage so that the people who take those jobs can afford to live here in the county. Real GDP, you see there. Now, in terms of the GDP, this is an update from last year. It's still the case that the decline in economic activity in Ventura County is highly concentrated in a single sector. So here we call this non-durables manufacturing and enterprise management. It's mostly biotechnology and related fields here in Ventura County. And you actually see that since the 2007, there's actually been a decline of $20 billion of economic activity net since that time. And so very substantial. And as we all know, the history of Amgen moving IT and HR to Tampa, Florida in search of more favorable cost of living. And there are actually segments of the economy, a number of them that have grown, 1.3 billion, 1.1, 1.9, but actually just those additional sectors, you know, the large growers are about $8 or $9 billion total, the ones that are actually growing modestly. And so there's work to be done to have a broader, more diverse economic base in Ventura County. I also want to focus on agriculture because in a bit we're going to talk about land use. And the reality is that agriculture is not just economic product that we all benefit from, GDP and GDP growth. It's also part of the fabric of this community. We actually said that we were going to set aside significant shares of the county land area to support agriculture. And so you need to know that agriculture is struggling. So you see a very significant decline here in the last 4 years for which we have data. And in fact, we are now back to 2007 levels of output this is adjusted for inflation, this is real output. And so, again, there is work to be done. Our commitment to agriculture actually needs to be that we not only set land aside, but that we actually make the policy changes and the commitments that make it easier to keep that production here, to house the workers, and to pay the laborers, and so there's work to be done. When we look at jobs, we see other signs of weakness. Interestingly, all job growth is positive every year except the COVID-19. So these blue bars are above zero because in almost every year we see positive net job gains. But what's interesting is if we take the highest paying sectors, these sectors here have an average salary of $125,000 collectively. We actually see that in the sectors that pay something close to a living wage, most years we're losing jobs, and in fact the last 2 years have been particularly difficult. We've seen a lot of job losses in those sectors. And then inflation is also a big part of this picture. So what's interesting here is that we looked at real average salaries since the onset of inflation in 2020. And what's amazing is for Ventura County workers, almost every sector has real salary losses. So that's to say wages have increased but have not increased to offset the rate of inflation. And so again, this is a challenge for workers in these industries. In fact, you see non-durable manufacturing, state government, transportation, warehousing, accommodation, just a few. And in many cases, those sectors where we have the largest shortage of workers, where they've actually seen real wage gains. And yet, amidst that background, we see the extraordinary growth of home prices continues apace. $924,000 was the average median home price across all of last year, an all-time high. We actually hit $974,000 in July, and we expect to see, there's a seasonal component to all of this. So wages, real wages in decline, a flight of economic activity and jobs, high home prices. And so we rank in the most recent rankings from the National Association of Realtors the second most unaffordable housing market county in the entire, of all major metropolitan areas in the United States. Now, those of you that are here last year actually noticed this is an improvement. We were the single least affordable 1 year ago. And what you really see here is that there's 3 of these that are sort of tightly bunched: Los Angeles, Oxnard, San Diego, and then Riverside, the 4th least affordable, is quite a bit more affordable than the other 3. And so that's to say we expect some jockeying among these 3. But what's interesting in Ventura County is that Ventura County is down here with elevated home prices, even though we're seeing that flight of economic activity, $20 billion decline in biotech, for example. This one is really, really interesting. We were inspired by the Wall Street Journal. They did an amazing article you should look up that went to a series of metropolitan areas around the United States, and they looked at a house that was sold 3 different times over time, over about 15 years. They said, what were the demographic characteristics of the individual who was able to buy that house at each moment in time? And of course, across the United States, we've seen a shortage of housing, we've seen rapid home price appreciation, and it's taken a wealthier and wealthier household to buy the same house over that period of time. And so that inspired us to really try and do the same calculation. So these are numbers that mirror the Wall Street Journal's numbers for the United States. You see that back in 2012, $50,000 was sufficient household income to buy the median home across the United States. That has grown to $145,000. What's amazing is that today, to buy the median home in Ventura County, you need a household income of $360,000. And now this is the median home. This is probably built in 1960. It has 3 bedrooms, but it's maybe 1,500 square feet, a tiny yard in the back. This is the median home, $360,000. When we look at incomes, there is one sector that would provide, if you had 2 wage earners in that sector, a living wage that would allow them to work to buy this home, the median home. That sector is enterprise management, average salary of $174,000 a year. So 2 incomes in that one sector will allow a household to afford the median home in Ventura County. So housing affordability continues to be a major driver of economic outcomes. The story here is purely supply. It can't be a primarily demand-driven story. There's a demand component. This is an incredible place to live. But obviously with economic activity declining in the county, this is primarily a supply story. And what you see here is that we are producing, on average, homes about 1/3 the rate or less that we did historically, and that would be required to sustain home prices at a more affordable level. What's interesting here is you see multifamily homes. There's actually been some progress in the area of multifamily homes, the yellow bars, but you actually see we have built very, very, very few single-family homes, basically since 2005. And so housing affordability is a major driver of economic outcomes. Now, to really sort of capture really the difference between Ventura County and a national trend, it is true that across the United States that home prices are appreciating very rapidly, and we're undersupplied in nearly every market in the United States. I wanted to give you this comparison. So notice, in the 1990s, the United States was producing about 5.1 homes a year per 1,000 population. Okay? That has declined to 4.8. So there has been this secular decline across the United States. Ventura County started 3.6 in the 1990s and has declined to 1.7. To put that comparison in perspective, it used to be that Ventura County was producing homes about 28% less than the United States on average. And today, Our production is 64% below the national average, right? And so that's to say the supply crisis is getting worse and worse and worse. And there's a need to address land use policy and housing to really turn a corner in the county. And so we see net domestic outflows continue. So you can see there's a general downward trend here, although last year, 2024, was not as bad as the previous year. Mortgage rates have caused some mortgage lock, and so there's less movement generally across the United States. That's part of the story in last year's net migration. But again, work to be done. Now, we were challenged by our CERF advisory board a year and a half ago. Tell us who these people are. Give us a portrait of who it is that's leaving the county. And so we did some demographic work. It turns out that people leaving the county are younger on average. They're usually between 20 and 40 years of age. They're middle income, between $50,000 and $150,000 in household income. And we actually, last year at this event, painted some portraits of those Ventura County natives who tried to raise their children here and couldn't make it go. And so I want to invite you to revisit those because these are some really telling stories about the lengths that many Ventura County natives go, not just to make sure that their kids have an opportunity that they had, but to even continue making it go in their own lifetime. In many cases, households are just a single layoff or job relocation away from not making it work. And so I invite you to check those out. And then I want to return to sort of CERF's mantra, policy matters. You have to look to the policies and really understand what are the drivers of the dynamics, and then talk about what are modest changes we can make that might make a difference in outcomes. And so let's talk about SOAR, Save Open Spaces and Save Open Space and Agricultural Resources. So this is the subject of quite a bit of empirical, peer-reviewed research that I have done, and I'm trained as a land use economist. Back beginning in the late 1990s, Ventura County was really following a wave of land use and urban growth restriction policies around the United States, but we did something that no other county in the United States did. So this is our county, and what happened is there were 8 separate growth boundaries put around cities, and then there was a county-wide coordinating initiative that aligned all land use policy around the entire county. And there was no planning for future development. What it said is that if you want to increase the developable area anywhere in Ventura County, you need a majority vote of the electorate. And so this is definitely part of an era of growth policies that were sweeping the United States. So in the late 90s, 37 separate growth control measures appeared on California ballots. 23% of urban areas in the United States implemented some form of growth restriction. But what we did was totally different in that there was no consideration of future growth, and we're the only county in the United States that does zoning by ballot box. We are singular among growth restrictions, and it shouldn't surprise us that there has been a singular result economically. As we look down the curb, the city-urban restriction boundary, this is an economic condition you will not find anywhere else in the United States. On the right-hand side, this is Camarillo, and you actually have land that, according to the county assessor, is worth, with minus improvements, is worth about $2.5 million an acre. On the left-hand side of the road, a stone throws away, you have land that sells for about $70,000 an acre. There is no rental gradient like that anywhere in the United States, because obviously there is no development right. It's been completely stripped off this land, and it requires a county electorate. And unfortunately, the county, with one exception, which is Santa Paula, has been absolutely against modifications to growth boundaries. Now, Santa Paula is interesting because Santa Paula did something that no other city did. Every other city placed the curb on the sphere of influence line. Santa Paula set it well inside the sphere of influence line. And so what Santa Paula has done in order to actually enable a significant amount of single-family home building, the single-family home building you see in that chart I showed earlier, they've actually moved their curb to push it out closer to where it is in all the other cities, all right? And so there's work to be done here, and we feel really strongly about this. And so trying to sort of put a finger on how we got here, and more importantly about what can we do positively, affirmatively, moving forward to change the dynamic. We sort of thought we'd sort of step back to the beginning. So Bill Fulton is a renowned land use planner. Bill was once the mayor of the city of Ventura, and he's actually one of the architects of our land use planning system. And so we went back to Bill and said, Bill, you were here in the county at the time this was being passed. What happened? What's the background? What worked the way it was intended? You know, what worked the way what was unintended? And I just want to let Bill share his thoughts about what's unfolded.
My wife and I were living in LA. We wanted to buy a house and start a family. Driving toward Ventura was the only direction out of LA that I liked. As with so many people, I think the combination of communities and open space and agriculture is attractive. It's just a beautiful place. I'm a land use planner by training. In 2003, I ran for the city council in Ventura, primarily because I thought we needed to promote and encourage some of the ideas of smart growth that I've been promoting in my professional life. The 80s was really the time when slow growth ballot measures around the state became common. We began to see limits on the amount of development, the number of houses, things like that. We began to see ballot measures seeking not to restrict the numerical amount of growth, but rather the geographical expanse of growth. And Ventura County is probably the only county in the country that has voter-created urban growth boundaries. There was in particular a major project proposed in Somas that would have been a very large subdivision of 1-acre lots. Although the Ventura SOAR came first, the impetus for the county-wide SOAR largely came out of that situation in Somas. And the other was the general response to sprawl, and especially to the traffic that sprawl created. That led to a significant political response where people in almost every city realized, I like my community and I want to keep that. We don't want to become Orange County. It was never positive, it was all negative. We moved here because it's not the Valley. I'll never forget a letter to the editor in the Star one day in the middle of the SOAR debate, where the letter writer was furious about the possibility of higher density infill development. And this is a direct quote because I'll never forget it. The letter writer said, "The purpose of SOAR is not to generate high density development. The purpose of SOAR is to rid the county of excess people." And I always wondered which people he thought were excess. I think originally the SOAR advocates weren't looking 30 or 50 years ahead. They were looking 10 or 20 years ahead and saying, these boundaries will be fine for now. So one of the problems with ballot box zoning or putting land use measures on the ballot is that it's a yes or no. The voters vote for SOAR or they vote against it. Land use doesn't work that way. Land use is subtle, it's nuanced, it requires a lot of trade-offs and compromises. I think we have to stop thinking about land use separately from economic development. One of the interesting sidelights, I think, that doesn't often get talked about is that the SOAR boundaries, especially in some cities, limited the amount of land available for industrial, for warehouse, and for factories. Ventura still struggles today with companies. A lot of people want to be in Ventura. It's viewed as an attractive community, a lot of business owners. If you start a business in Ventura, particularly an industrial business, it's almost impossible to scale it up. We can make headway on the housing problem by increasing densities. We can't solve the factory problem without expanding the boundaries in at least some cities. The difficulty in trying to create an income ladder in Ventura County comes from where is the space inside the boundaries for the jobs that need to be created. We think about tourism and we think about agriculture, and we don't think about the upward ladder of mobility and the skilled jobs that are going to create that prosperity. We need to figure out how to create more prosperity and how to make sure that everybody in the county shares in that prosperity.
All right, so there will be a longer form version of this interview that we did with Bill Fulton available on our YouTube page after the event. But first of all, I just wanted to reiterate some of the claims. If you start a business in Ventura County, it's almost impossible to scale it. Current SOAR boundaries are incompatible with maintaining an income ladder for residents. Land use policy is economic development policy. Now, we also discussed with Bill some just modest changes that can be done right now to start changing the balance and changing the amount of developable land. One was he talked about, well, land use involves trade-offs and compromises. Let's embrace that. Let's trade amenities, parks, outdoor recreation, things that communities can invest in to trade for the expansion of the amount of land available for development. You could trade permanent preservation for ecologically sensitive land for expansion and growth boundaries. There was actually a pilot project we were working on prior to the pandemic in Camarillo that the Nature Conservancy, the Trust for Public Land, and the Ventura Land Trust were at the discussion at a table talking about a particular area, a particular parcel, set of parcels on the Oxnard Plain that were of intense ecological interest and value, and that they would be willing to support boundary modifications in order to secure that property. So there's real opportunity for collaboration here. We also talked with Bill about the Oregon model. Ultimately, that entire era of urban growth restrictions in the United States and in California were modeling policies that were pioneered by the state of Oregon in the 1970s. In the 1970s, Oregon passed state legislation requiring every single city to establish an urban growth boundary. But then interestingly, they followed that with state policy that required cities to estimate housing needs and then to move the boundary every 10 years to accommodate growth, right? So they have, in there, growth boundaries are more about where are we going to grow, and let's make sure we do it thoughtfully and strategically, and we protect the community and environmental, agricultural resources that are most valuable, and expand thoughtfully. And so the Oregon model is one that would be a more significant departure. But how about requiring cities to forecast housing needs and move boundaries in the event that they cannot satisfy housing needs through infill development? We'll come back a little bit. There's a call to action at the end. And there's a role you can really play on the infill front. That doesn't require any change to policy, but it does mean showing up and lending your voice to the need for housing. I also want to point you back 2 years ago to features we did with Drew Powers and Brian Gabriel. They're really trying to highlight where are cities, and this is not exclusive. You heard Moore Park is at the forefront of this. Oxnard, Camarillo, Ventura are making real inroads. But we featured these two because they were willing to sit for interviews, talking about a roadmap and what this looks like at the city level. And these are some of the things that Drew and Brian recommended. Acknowledge that housing and jobs are essential components of quality of life. There's not a trade-off between quality of life and housing and jobs. Housing and jobs are essential components of quality of life. Let's change the conversation in the county. At the city level, their city managers' offices are cultivating pro-growth attitude. I know this is happening at the county level with the Economic Vitality Strategic Plan process. Aggressively in court incumbent businesses. Let's not simply always be looking over the horizon for what's next. Let's find out what the large businesses that are here, the large employers, need in order to scale and to continue to grow and to provide an economic ladder. And then let's be open to new ideas. Let's not simply try and forecast what the next growth industry is. Let's have a dynamic, robust economy that welcomes unseen opportunities. Nobody could have planned for Amgen. Nobody could have planned for Trade Desk, all right? You need to be open for the opportunities and then roll out the red carpet when they come. And so there's a neat roadmap in those two features. So Ventura County's future economic forecast looks very similar to the present. So this is sort of a baseline status quo forecast. It's near zero growth. It's a continued outflight of residents, although at a lower rate than the average of the last several years. It's ever increasing home prices. We expect very shortly that the average median home price across the entire 12 months will crest $1 million, right? How much household income will you need then to buy, $420,000? And so there's things we can do. So this forecast is by no means inevitable. And so I sort of wanted to give Matt Levere the last word and the call to action. And so I was really, really grateful to spend time with Matt, just talking about his story, what it was like growing up in Ventura County. I wasn't born here. I didn't come here until 1999. Hearing the story of a Ventura County native who actually was able to come back and now who's determined to make sure that his kids have the same opportunity that he had in Ventura County. And so please welcome Matt Levere's comments.
My name's Matt Levere. I am a native son. I'm actually a second-generation Ventura County resident, currently raising my 2 young daughters here, so my family has deep roots in this community. I think the things that I love most about Ventura County are obviously the natural beauty. It's an incredibly beautiful place to live, but it's also the people. It's a special community, and having been born and raised here, it's a community I always knew I wanted to come back to. I graduated from our local schools. I ended up going to college at Pepperdine University. I graduated in 2000, always wanting to come back to Ventura County. At that point in my life, there was no opportunities for people like myself, no jobs and no housing. And so that led me on a journey to Washington, D.C., and eventually law school, and getting my law degree, which was kind of my golden ticket back home. I had my first daughter in 2013, and I think anybody who has that first child recognizes how it kind of recalibrates your worldview, and you start thinking about a lot of things besides just yourself. In those 13 years since I tried to come back, not much had changed. There was still so little opportunity for young people in Ventura County. And that's what led me into politics initially, was trying to be a new voice at the elected level, thinking about our community 20 years down the line and what we were doing to make sure that there were housing opportunities, workforce opportunities for my daughter and everybody else's daughters, sons, and grandchildren. A real challenge of Ventura County, and it's a real concern of mine, is that we're becoming more and more a community of haves and have-nots. I think the obvious challenge is housing. Ever since I've been in elected office, I've had so many conversations with CEOs, with business leaders, and I've heard over and over again the challenges of growing their companies, the challenges of hiring. I don't believe we have lived up to the intentions and the goals of CERF. I see, quite frankly, a lot of hypocrisy from people who say they're pro-CERF, but they still fight these developments, and it's frustrating to me. There's this general theme that you hear from some people in the community that they just don't want anything to change. Status quo. And I'm very clear in talking with these people that the status quo is not an option. If we're going to be an economically viable and economically prosperous community, we have to move forward. Nobody wants Ventura County to become the San Fernando Valley. Nobody wants a Ventura County which is completely paved over. But we also, in the same sense, have to understand that no growth is not an option. Here's how I would define the county economy today, is that I see the potential. And I think that if we start focusing on several of the challenges, the sky's the limit. If there was one challenge I would give to all of the attendees at the event today, is we all have a role to play in terms of solving the county's housing crisis. We all have to get engaged. For too long, there's been, in my view, a vocal minority controlling the discussion about smart growth in Ventura County. But for all of those who want Ventura County to be economically viable, economically prosperous moving forward, for all of us who want a Ventura County where our kids and our grandkids can thrive, it starts today by getting involved at the local level, attending your city council meetings, attending the board of supervisors meetings, speaking up for the importance of housing. So in 20, 30 years, when our kids and our grandkids are hoping to come back to Ventura County just like I did, they have those opportunities, which so many people in my generation didn't have.
All right. So the call to action is get engaged. Lend your voice to the importance of housing. Support your elected officials. We saw during COVID-19, and it's still true today, that we have courageous elected officials willing to make the hard choices to do what's best for our community. Support the staff at city and county government. Give them the tools to provide a broadly shared prosperity for our community. And engage with us, partner with us at CERF, get to know us, and please join us 1 year from today back in this room where we once again visit, celebrate what's been accomplished in the past year, and then chart the path for the next year ahead. So thank you very much for your time.